I have to say right off the top that Marlene is one of my heroes, a national treasure from Canada. And we're from the same community, which is the Tyendinaga First Nation. I'm a band member there, although I lived in a inner city of Toronto, which is about 100 miles away. But yeah, she's really an inspiration to me, always has been. I want to just start my comments. I'll be fairly brief because I think I need to leave some time for Fred there too. Um, my personal experience was really around being a kind of a clinical researcher at the University of Toronto, getting my Master of Science and PhD, and then being exposed to people like Diane Longboat, who was a leader in our community, and other elders while at the University of Toronto. And I realized that I had an opportunity to make a difference in my community. And so I made that shift into public health, population health. And I did it after I got my PhD, actually. And it was really interesting timing because as Marlene talked about the Royal Commission, that kind of completed its deliberations and its report the same year that I graduated with my PhD. And so that was wonderful timing for me. But, the notion of participatory action research in um, in Indigenous health was very clear. What I learned at the University of Toronto about the process was that it really valued community voices, and that's what our community was telling us that they wanted in a research enterprise. So I just want to focus my comments on the National Funding Agency, which is the Canadian Institutes for Health Research. Prior to that was the Medical Research Council of Canada, and there was virtually no involvement of Indigenous people in the Medical Research Council of Canada. When they created the CIHR, the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, there was about 40 applications for institute status across the country, and of those 40, 13 were selected. And one of those was an institute devoted to Indigenous people's health. So it's kind of like a Canadian version of an NIH on a much smaller scale, of course. And among those 13 institutes, they had the sort of disease and body part institutes that would be more familiar to people in the NIH, but they also had an Institute of Gender and an Institute of Indigenous Peoples' Health among the 13. And those are still world firsts, I believe. And so I was the inaugural scientific director of that institute. And Marlene and Fred at different times, but Marlene was on the inaugural advisory board for this institute. And I was fortunate enough to have an advisory board that was really the dream team of Indigenous scholars from across the country and allies as well. And so we ended up developing a program of research as one of the 13 institutes that were all treated the same. So it'd be the Institute of Cancer, the Institute of Heart, Neuroscience. We all received the same amount of discretional funding. We focused our efforts initially on capacity building. That was the first project that we did and created a network of centers across Canada to train the next generation of scholars. But the advisory board, and especially with Marlene's leadership, directed me to look at ethics, at the ethics of conducting research that built on the work of the Royal Commission. And so, it was really important. We went to the scientific advisory board, which included all the 13 scientific directors and the president and the director of research, and we got the go-ahead unanimously to develop a code of research ethics, and this was something that Marlene actually, it was her idea to do this. And so we ended up, spending 5 years actually developing this code of research ethics within the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. And so it required a lot of work to get the work done to what would a code of ethics look like, a lot of consultation and a lot of refining of these documents until we ended up with a CIHR made, Canada made Indigenous Code of Research Ethics for experimentation or research on human subjects. And embedded within that code of ethics was this notion of community governance, right? And community governance is really participatory action research on the conduct of research. And so that was important. Now it's been 25 years, since the CIHR was created, and the Code of Research Ethics has actually guided the research enterprise. So every project that gets funded that is Indigenous within Canada on the health domain has to abide by these guidelines. And it was really important because Marlene also undertook an enormous task of bringing together our community to get something called the Tri-Council Policy Statement on Research Ethics. That involved the health researchers, the science and engineering, and the social sciences and humanities. So those three research councils came together under Marlene's leadership to be able to have a chapter in the Code of Ethics. And that chapter was kind of a landmark policy statement, and embedded in it was participatory action research. Um, but we found out after some time that having codes of ethics didn't ensure compliance. So after stepping down after 8 years as the inaugural scientific director, I took up the position as the chair of the peer review panel, reviewing all the research grants that came in that were Indigenous. And in that, we actually looked at iterative review and conditional funding. The notion that, and there were two principles. One was community engagement and scientific merit. And the projects that got funded had to be A scores or above 4 out of 5 in both community engagement and scientific merit. And if they didn't, it was iterative in the sense that they could actually get another chance to resubmit. They would get 1 year bridge funding and then do it. The reason I bring that up is because, there's resources available to research to conduct research in a good way, as Marlene was saying. But the way to do that is to actually hold the money back and make it a consequence if you don't actually abide by the community governance model. And so, I think it's been good, but I think, we need to revisit and kind of update in the consequences of what's going on now in the research domain, looking at artificial intelligence, precision medicine, genomics. All these are very, very contentious issues that involve a lot of trust. And I think it's participatory action research is going to, be a very useful tool as it was before, but going forward into these other domains where people have a lot of misgivings, I guess, about how the data will be used in the future, how the data about their biological characteristics. And I'll just stop there and turn it over to Fred.